Hola, in our previous video we learned about the subject, the object and the verb. If you did not check that video, click the link in the description box for more, because that video will help you to understand today's video. In today's lesson we are going to learn about the direct and the indirect object. So if you have two objects in one sentence, how do you tell whether the object is direct or the object is indirect? When I find out, watch to the end to learn more. And if you're new, don't forget to subscribe. Let us start by defining the object. So the object is the receiver of the action. The subject does the action, the object receives the action. We have this one example. She is playing the guitar. We have she as the subject. She is the one who's performing the action. And then we have the action itself, which is playing. Playing is the action, which is the verb. And then the guitar. The guitar is the one that is receiving the action. So the guitar is the object. The guitar becomes our object. So the object is the receiver of the action. In this case, we have one object. So in the case where we have two objects, one is direct and the other one is indirect object. We're beginning with the direct object. And the direct object is a person, a thing, or an animal that receives the action directly. That is one. Number two, it answers the question, what? Lastly, the direct object comes after the indirect object. In a sentence where we have two objects, we'll have the indirect object coming first, followed by the direct object. The indirect object, and it is a person or an animal that receives the action indirectly. It answers the question to whom or for whom. And lastly, the indirect object usually comes first. Let's go to the examples. Number one, I hope you can see clearly. The teacher bought Jane a present. That is a sentence that has two objects, the direct and the indirect object. So let us use method one. We have said the direct object answers the question what, indirect object answers the question to whom or for whom. So let us analyze it. First we have the teacher as the subject, and then we have our action is bought. These two are the object. The teacher bought what? You're right. The teacher bought a present. The present is the direct object because it answers the question what. So this is direct object. The indirect object, to whom or for whom did the teacher bought the present? Jane. So Jane is the indirect object. Number two, let us use the second method. The school gave him a laptop. And in this case, we say the indirect object usually comes first. And then it is followed by the direct object. So I'm going to analyze even without checking or reading. I'll say this is the subject. This is the verb. This is the indirect object. And this is the direct object. Direct object. Is it true? Okay. The school gave him what? A laptop. The laptop now, because it answers the question what, is the direct object. For whom? Him. Indirect object. Lastly, he, subject, bought, the verb, me is the indirect object, usually comes first, and a car is the direct object. He bought me what? A car. For whom did he bought a car? Me. Me, which is the indirect object. You're receiving the action indirectly. I have these three questions. I want you to pause your video for a minute and then try to identify the direct object and the indirect object. You can analyze the sentence as a whole, having the subject, the verb, direct object, then the indirect object. Let's see whether you're right. Okay, now let us do it together to see whether you did the right thing. But I'm sure you did the right thing. We start with the first one. The visiting speaker told us a fascinating story. First, the subject is the whole of this. The visiting speaker is the subject. Told is the verb. And then we have who? We have the indirect object. And then we have the direct object, a fascinating story. The visiting speaker told us what? A fascinating story. To whom? To us. The bank lent her money. The bank is the subject. Lend, the verb. Indirect object. Direct object. Lastly, my sister, the subject. Promised, the verb. Me, indirect object. A phone, direct object. Just like that. So the most simple way, or what you need to understand is that the indirect object will always come first, followed by the direct object. The indirect object answers the question for whom or to whom, and the direct object answers the question what. And that brings us to the end of our lesson. But in case you have a question, let me know in the comments and I'll be very happy to respond. Thank you so much for watching. If this video has been helpful to you, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Thank you once again. Bye bye. I'll see you later. Always be happy.